The following is a recorded program of an actual stroke support group. The comments expressed are the personal opinions of the participants and not necessarily the opinions of the producers, sponsors, or the broadcasters of this show. This program is not to be used as a way to diagnose or treat any medical condition that you may have. Please consult your doctor or healthcare professional before making any changes to your current medical routine.
Stroke.
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 It comes out of the blue, sometimes without warning.
But those who survive it
should never lose hope.
A stroke can be life-changing.
But it is also
a new beginning.
Because for all survivors, there is still a beautiful life after stroke.
Hey everybody, you're listening to Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing, and today we're doing something a little differently. The first half of this show, we are going to be at one location, and then through the magic of radio, we're going to pop up someplace else. So right now, we are at the Division of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy at USC, and we are chatting with two doctors here who are just really doing some really amazing things when it comes to the advances in stroke rehabilitation and stroke therapy and stroke recovery. And we'll get into more of that in a second. Later on in the show, we're going to be at our home base back at Providence St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank, California, with our usual crew. So to start us off, we're going to talk to Dr. James Finley and Dr. Natalia Sanchez, and they are part of the Division of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy here at USC, and they have a long list of accomplishments and credentials that I won't even begin to try to convey. I will leave it to them. Dr. Finley, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone and tell everyone and just brag a little bit about all the great things that you've done.
Oh, wow. So, again, my name is James Finley, and I'm an assistant professor here in biokinesiology and physical therapy. I'm actually an engineer by training, so I did my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida, and from there completed a master's and PhD in biomedical engineering from Northwestern University in Chicago. After that, I moved on to do what's called a postdoctoral fellowship, so an extended period of research at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, in their neuroscience department, and from there moved out here to Los Angeles.
Man, every show I always say the most baby-faced people have the longest resume I have ever seen. I mean, man, did you start when you were 3? I mean, how did you get on?
3.5.
3.5. Okay, no.
I'll take baby face.
You'll take baby.
I appreciate that. Best compliment of the week.
Oh my goodness! And just I applaud you on your accomplishments. It's just so awesome. Seated next to him is Dr. Natalia Sanchez, and I'll let her brag a little bit.
Yeah. So my name is Natalia Sanchez. I am a researcher here at the Division of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy. I also am an engineer by training, so I'm originally from Colombia. I got my bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering there. And then I moved to the States. I came to Chicago, where I got my master's and PhD at Northwestern University as well. And I came to LA 3.5 years ago to work as a postdoctoral researcher here in the division, and I've been here ever since doing research with participants and people after stroke for over the last 10 years.
See, you're another one. What is with it? I mean, unbelievable. That's why I keep saying...
we are inside a lot, so we don't get the damaging effects from the sun.
I keep saying I'm taking this show to video, and I'm going to do it, doggone it, because, I mean, if every week it just seems like, it's like, wait a minute, you got this long list of accomplishments, and you guys all look like you're 20. So at any rate, and then to kind of add on to this a little bit, full disclosure, I have been participating in a couple of the, what do you call them, trials, testings, research?
Research projects or studies, ongoing studies.
I've been participating in a couple of their research studies here, and the reason why I decided to have them on the show is because I've just been so blown away just by what they do and how they do it and things like that. And so I just said, you guys got to be on the show. And Natalia was very kind the other day. She goes, well, I've been listening to your podcast and it's so cool. I learned so much. And so I said, well, you know what? We're just going to put you on now. Everybody's going to learn from you now. So she's kind of paying it forward. So, but really one of the reasons why I wanted to have them on the show is because really one of the things I think that's blown me away the most, and Dr. James mentioned it a little bit, and Natalia did too for that matter, is that there's so many engineers that are involved in this department. And I was surprised to hear that, because a lot of times you think that anybody who participates in trying to develop things that will, help with stroke recovery and rehabilitation and things like that will be medical doctors. But a lot of you in this department have all come from the engineering field, and some from other countries. Talk a little bit about that, Dr. James.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that I really like about our division specifically, is that we're able to combine, faculty from multiple disciplines. So there are faculty who have training in psychology, physical therapy, neuroscience, engineering, and I think that's one of the reasons or ways by which we can do what I would consider fairly innovative research. So I think one common question that I receive often is, why, as an engineer, why are you in a physical therapy department?
Yes, exactly.
And I think it's a great question. So maybe the short version of the story is, when I was an undergrad, I was interested in becoming an automotive engineer. So I essentially wanted to study mechanical engineering so that I could make cars faster. This is 18-year-old James. But through a series of circumstances, I had an opportunity. I was supposed to do an internship with Ford. They cut their internship program, and I ended up at a company called Medtronic, and they make medical devices. So that was the first time that I actually was exposed to engineering as a way to help people. So I was in their cardiac surgery technologies division for a couple of summers, and their research division for one summer. So through the last couple of years of my undergrad training, I was taking classes in typical engineering classes alongside anatomy and physiology. So it was there where I started to see parallels between how engineers design systems and robots and how the body naturally functions. So I became really interested in understanding if we could apply engineering techniques, analyses, to better understand how the body works.
Now, is it people like you, professors like you, students like you have, and so forth? Are you and they the ones that become those who create like orthotic devices and braces and things that just help mobility and things like that?
Yeah, so there are people who are certified to design prostheses and orthotics. So that those are one set of professionals. And on the engineering side, you see people who are adding essentially actuators or power to those devices. So if you've seen powered prostheses that look more like robotic components, that's more of the engineering side. So even in that case, you have engineers, again, working closely with physical therapists and patients to design devices to help improve mobility. One of the things that really has impressed me so much about you guys through being here the past couple of times that I've been here and to participate in the studies and stuff is, just really how much engineering really goes into the study itself, because, I've only been in the stroke world for 9 months now, but, a lot of my exercising or a lot of the things that I've had to do as a stroke survivor has been, walking to try to improve my ability to walk and balance and things like that. And it's worked greatly, but it's been really interesting to work with you guys to see it from a whole different angle. It's almost like I'm looking at it from behind the curtain in a sense, because the things that you guys hook up to people like me and the other stroke survivors who are participating in your research, it's like something out of the Matrix, it's just like, all the gadgets and the wires and the electrodes and the things, and I know I'm not calling them the right names, but you know what I mean. And then, you look at a computer and you study it, and it's amazing to see all the people who are devoting their lives to helping all of us get our lives back, and how much of a village that really takes, right? And the brains behind it all and things like that. Natalia, you were kind of the one that I kind of consider you're the one that I got to dance with, the one that brung me. You were the one that kind of contacted me and some of the other people in your department and said, hey, will you come and be a part of this? Where did the passion come from within you to want to do what you do and devote?
Yeah, so this is actually pretty funny. When I was, I think on the 5th grade, I did this project about the brain. For some reason, I've always found it really fascinating. And I did it when I was like 10. And I had this encyclopedia of the brain that I created for this school project. So I always was very interested. And as I was going to graduate from high school, I was planning to do pre-med. But this is all my dad being, you're too good at math. You need to use that math. You need to do engineering. So then back in Colombia, they had just started the biomedical engineering program. I was like, this is it. This is wonderful. And then when I was in the last year of my undergrad, I got an internship at the Rehab Institute of Chicago, which is now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And that's kind of where I started working with participants and people after stroke for the first time. And I was just amazed by the technology. They had like resources that I never even thought possible, and just working with the people. There is nothing that I enjoy more than doing experiments and working with participants, because I have not had a bad experience. Everyone has such an amazing story to share. And then as an engineer, I come in and I get the numbers, because everything that you do in the lab, we measure. And so that's kind of my engineering side, where I'm like really excited to interact with you, but I'm also very excited to get all these numbers that I'm getting from you that then I can input into a computer and do all these simulations and build all these models and get all these numbers that we cannot get just by observation.
Right.
So that's kind of how I ended here, by combining these two passions of working with people and then just being really good at math.
Right. Well, we thank goodness for that, and thank you, Dad. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Dr. James and Dr. Natalia are going to kind of walk us through a little bit of what takes place in some of this research that goes on, and all the data that they input and things like that. And then they're also going to tell us a little bit about where they see some of this information that they gleaned from this research, how they see it maybe benefiting stroke survivors and stroke recovery in the future, and where they see the world of stroke 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. So sit tight and we'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing, and we are at USC in the Division of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy. The first half of the show, we are here, and the second half of the show, we're going to be back at home base, back in Burbank, through the miracle of radio. But as I said, right now we're on the campus of USC, and we're speaking with Dr. James Finley and Dr. Natalia Sanchez, and they are in the research department here, and they're just really making a huge difference and a huge impact in stroke recovery and rehabilitation and things like that. Doctors, will kind of walk us through a little bit of kind of a day in the life of a researcher. I mean, what is it that you guys do? And I'm sure it just varies upon whatever experiment you're going after.
Yeah.
But in the broad stroke of things, what is it that you're really trying to discover here?
Sure. So I think if a day in the life will be different for both of us, so that I think would be actually really useful for the audience to see how that differs. So as an assistant professor and the director of the lab, a lot of my role is in thinking about the sort of big picture of how the different projects in the lab connect, how they're being executed, how we're designing experiments, and ultimately thinking about how we support that research, and even, of course, extending into teaching, right? So how we teach primarily graduate students in our program. So those two components, those are sort of two of the three major things that you would do as an assistant professor. We think about those as, teaching and scholarship. So a day in the life for me typically involves some sort of management duties. So thinking about what experiments do we have going on today, this week, oftentimes what grants and papers do we need to write. So you can think of those as the input and output of research. So again, I'm going to engineering speak really quickly.
We'll all be nerds here. Don't worry.
So the way that I like to explain what we do is that being a lab director is basically like running a startup company. So you're responsible for securing funding so that you can do the research. The output of that research typically includes presentations. So I'm actually going to a conference in Washington, D.C. next week week, a physical therapy meeting where I'll be talking about some of the work we're doing in the lab.
Oh, that's so cool.
And from there, we would then publish that work. So publications for us are typically in scientific journals.
Publishing seems to be a pretty big deal once you reach a certain point. Why is that?
So the reason is because that's how we communicate what we've done. So, grant applications are a communication of what you will do, and then you actually have to complete those objectives or those aims. So I like to compare academia and industry. In industry, you're often concerned with a product as the output, right? If I'm working at, again, a medical device company, I need to create a product that will hopefully help people and also generate revenue. On the academic end, we create or we generate information, I should say. And the ultimate goal for at least for me, for those papers, is that they would ultimately impact clinical practice. So that happens through different avenues. One is if you can imagine doing what we might call an intervention study. So if you find that intervention is successful by some measure, then what you would like to be able to do is to help implement that in practice. So that's one way that knowledge can be what we call translated. But we also do some of the studies, the more fundamental studies, because we don't know actually when that knowledge will be more or less applied. But when we're designing or doing research and we're coming up with our ideas, we're basing things on this kind of fundamental understanding that we develop through the literature.
And then who decides what gets researched? I mean, who sits around and says, hey, let's see what happens if we put this with this, and let's just sit and watch and see what it does, who comes up with those ideas?
So in some ways, we also decide what is studied. So again, a short version of how funding typically works. So I'll talk about federal funding primarily. So we might write a grant that we submit to the National Institutes of Health or the National Science Foundation. Those grants are reviewed primarily by other faculty or other researchers. And those are evaluated on what's called scientific merit. So are you making a sound case for what you want to do? They think about things like innovation. Is this new? And then what is the significance of the work? So if everything works out as planned, how will that expand our knowledge or maybe make an impact on health and so on?
And from the point that you decide you're going to research this study that applies to stroke to where you're given permission to follow through and the funding and all that, what kind of time frame are we looking at there?
So this is where I think it's important. Again, I'm an assistant professor, so this would be called more of a junior position. So typically you have assistant, associate, and full professor. So one thing that is of concern is that timeline. So there are some opportunities that have a much faster timeline. So for instance, one of the great things about USC and a lot of major universities is that there is what's called internal funding. So you can apply for some funding from the university. So those typically have a shorter timeline. They're not typically as much money as you might get from NIH, but you hear back, you hear the results more quickly.
Right.
So for NIH specifically, if you were to submit a grant,
National Institute of Health.
Yes, if you were to submit a grant in, let's say, June, that grant is reviewed something like October. You hear back about essentially the score of the grant. And in terms of when that grant could start, it may not start until the next summer.
Oh, wow.
So you're looking at oftentimes sort of a year turnaround between when you submit the grant and when you receive the funding. But there's a lot of
variables
involved, and it can be sooner or later depending on the climate and funding.
Right. And so then once funding has been authorized and approved and the check is in the mail and it's in the bank and it's sitting there and everything's good, how long do some of these studies go on for? I mean, I'm sure that all varies depending on the study itself, but...
so one of the major funding mechanisms through NIH would be a grant that can often last for 3 to 5 years. So that's a single, we would call it a single grant. That grant may have multiple projects associated with it. So that's I'd say that's kind of the best case scenario, because most of us would like stable funding so that we can spend more time doing the research than writing the grants.
Yeah, right. I heard that.
Because the thing is, so you were asking what do you research or who decides if that's a good question. So when you answer one question for a research project, you usually don't end up totally satisfied. You have more questions that stem from that you answer. So that's kind of like what shapes the trajectory of your research, is because in researching this one thing, you found out that there's this other thing that you can also research. So that's how kind of the whole process builds up.
So it's kind of like a little rabbit hole that you find yourself going down.
Oh, it's definitely a rabbit hole.
Exactly what it is. This is research.
Yeah, that's almost, in some ways, that's the best part of it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's probably the coolest part. Yeah, like you look for the rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah. But there are many rabbit holes. And so one of the most important decisions you can make as a scientist is which of these rabbit holes will I sort of peek into and dive down. And Yeah.
And gosh, what you find once you're down there is just such a cool thing, you know?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's the education that allows you to identify rabbit holes that are worth pursuing.
Sure. What are some of the things that either you've been involved in or things that maybe you are aware of that have been researched in the past that have now been implemented into, our stroke world that have gone on to do great things?
Well, that's a really great question. So, in essence, if you think about the state of, let's just talk about physical therapy today. A lot of current practice and training of physical therapists is based on what people refer to as evidence-based practice. So in other words, the faculty who are teaching the physical therapy students are communicating what they should do in a given situation with a given patient based on things that have been observed or reported in the scientific and medical literature. So that is, so in that sense, a large part of how PT is done today, at least by, PTs who are trained in these programs, is really based on all of the science that's happened before. In terms of something specific, that's a little bit harder for me to think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, sure.
I may come up with something.
Yeah, sure. I get it. Yeah. Dr. Natalia, I know that you're involved in a lot of really cool things that are going on, some of which I'm sure you probably can't speak publicly about. But kind of walk us through some of the things that you go through in the course of a day as a researcher, because I know that when I've come, you've been right there hands-on and things like that. Kind of walk us through a little bit of some of the things that you see and that your associates see when you put together some of this research and what you do.
So I'll kind of walk you through a day in my life, which is never like another day. My days are completely different from each other. But for example, one day, let's say last Friday, you came here, we ran an experiment. So I am supervising some of the students. We have now trained them. So that's another part of this, is that you train students to be independent to run these experiments. But I also have my own experiments, which I run by myself, or I lead the running of the experiment, and then I have people help me. So from these experiments, we get so much data, because you have sensors that are measuring your movement, the forces that you generate when you're walking. We're also recording how your muscles are working, so you have information from that. So right after the experiment, what I do is I go through all the data and make sure that it's all correct, that it's all there, and then I analyze this data, I process this data to get kind of summary information, because basically we have, let's say, 1,000 numbers that we collect in 1 second, multiply that by 5 minutes that we've been recording. That's an insane amount of data. So we need to come up with ways to kind of make this data understandable so that you can get information from it quickly. Then another big part of my day is also writing these scientific publications. What Dr. Finley didn't say is that basically scientific publications are the currency of science. So if your research is not published, your research does not exist.
Wow. So that's why I was saying, I keep hearing that publishing is a big deal. And it's not the same kind of publishing like you'd publish a book and put it on Amazon. Right. It's like a whole different thing of publishing.
Yeah. So, we could talk for hours about the sort of process of publishing and how that works. The typical...
Is it kind of like sticking a flag in the ground around and saying
Yes.
this is...
In some, so the cliche that you hear most frequently is publish or perish, alliteration, people like that. But the idea is, let's say that I want to write a grant and I say I'm going to do X. How do the reviewers know that I can do X? One way is to show that you've done something similar, right? So publication is really what establishes your expertise. And they can look at those papers and evaluate the quality of the research, the rigor, and get a sense for how you might perform in the future. So that is part of this this cycle, right? So once you publish the results of your research, if that work was funded, then you also have a sense for, given the fact that this person has received money in the past, what did they do with that money? Were they productive? And if so, then that makes it more likely that you could receive funding again in the future.
I see.
So there's another saying, which is the best way to get a grant is to have a grant.
Right.
So there's a lot of kind of chicken and egg issues related to breaking into the cycle, I would
It's
say.
kind of biblical to that. Those that are given much will be given more kind of thing. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So that's a lot of current discussions are about how should those funds be distributed? What are people happy with the way that the publishing system is functioning for the stakeholders, being the scientists doing the research? So it's very that process. Both of those processes are changing very rapidly. To basically be kind of more open and accessible.
Wow, really heavy. We're going to take another break. We are talking about kind of the mechanics behind stroke recovery and stroke rehabilitation and all of the data and all of the research that goes into helping stroke survivors recover and helping recovery and even not just recovery, but even maybe even a little bit of prevention in a sense, because you're kind of learning why things are and what can be done kind of beforehand, even as opposed to just after the fact. So it's very broad-based. We're going to take another break, and we'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing. Right now we are at the Division of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy at USC. Right after this, we're going to be back at home base in Burbank. But right now we're speaking with Dr. Natalia Sanchez as well as Dr. James Finley. And Dr. Natalia, you were telling me that the USC ranks pretty high in all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so our physical therapy department is number 1 in the nation. It's been ranked at number 1, I think, for the last 16 years. So basically our division has kind of 2 parts. So the physical therapy is the educational part, training of physical therapists, and the biokinesiology area is related to research. So we have a PhD and a master's program in biokinesiology, and we have a number of research areas. So we have research in neurorehabilitation, which is kind of the part of the research that we are part of. We also have research in biomechanics, research in physiology and development, and I think that is it.
I think that's pretty much
so
it.
those are all the areas of research that we have in the division. And then, so basically it's that combination of research and education that allow the program in physical therapy to be number 1 in the country.
That's so cool. Congratulations to you guys. Now, is what I was involved in, is that the biomechanics part of it? Or?
So that would be in the neurorehabilitation area.
I see.
So we combine kind of biomechanics and neurorehabilitation because we're doing analysis of walking, which is what you did, but we're trying to understand the neural mechanisms after stroke. So it's a merging. There's no division between fields here. All these fields are combined. We also do research looking at the energetics of walking. So that would also be more of a physiology aspect. So we're just combining every single thing and integrating all these fields to understand the human body.
Along those lines, one of the things that at least for me was really attractive about the division is that if you look, again, we talked about publications a lot today, but if you look at publications from the division, you see that people work together, right? So you have faculty from the different labs, the different focus areas who are collaborating, because it's hard to study any aspect of the human body or human performance in isolation.
Sure.
Right. So you have people who study mechanics who are interested in how the brain controls muscle activity. And there are many other examples about how these divisions or relationships happen.
You know, Dr. Natalia, there's so many cool things that you do in there. And having been there myself, I see all that kind of goes into it all. And it's really amazing. And during one of the breaks, I asked if I could show one of the pictures that you had me take, because you know how cool it is when we're all rigged up in our stuff. And you're like, oh, you got to take a picture of this. So I'll put the picture on the strokechannel.tv website. But all the electrodes that you put on us, the little buttons and the little transistors or whatever that is. I mean, I know I'm not calling them the right things, but what are the little dots that go all over?
So those are markers for motion capture. Okay. So just like people may have seen probably in animation, where they see people wearing like a suit with shiny markers, we use a very similar approach, but we're doing that for movement analysis.
And then the little receiver things that you stick on me with the wires and stuff, what does that do?
Oh, so there another part of what we add are what's called EMG, or those are sensors that measure muscle activity. And we also do parts of our experiments where we're looking at stimulation. So looking at ways in which we can stimulate the nervous system, essentially, to either be more responsive to the commands that your brain is trying to send to your muscles, or to sort of, I guess that's primarily the main point for that stimulation.
Yeah, but so these sensors that we use to measure muscle activation, they're basically picking up the electrical signal from your muscle, like it was a microphone on top of your skin, and they are sending this signal to a computer via Wi-Fi, which to me, the fact that you're getting information from a muscle and sent it via Wi-Fi to a computer to store it. I work with this technology every day, and I still just find that incredible.
Isn't it the truth? Yeah, it is amazing that you can, see something like that on a computer screen, all just by virtue of Wi-Fi, and that it's, like you said, they're like little microphones that are attached to your skin that are sending this message back to the computer. And I remember looking at the image on the screen that was in front of me, because I was in this big harness and all this stuff, and so I kind of saw this little pixelated version of myself, and walking and moving and all that data kind of just going right back. It's so amazing. Now, when you collect this data and you crunch the numbers and do all that, what happens then? I mean, what does this turn into something down the line? And with this data, once you collect it all, how long until it becomes kind of like a finished product in a sense?
Sure. So generally when we're running an experiment is because we have what we call a hypothesis. So we think that if we do A, then we should observe B. But we may also observe C, D, or E. So the first thing that we want to do when we process this data is to analyze whether our hypothesis is supported or not. So are our results consistent with what we predicted? But that's not the end of the story, because for anything you observe, there may be multiple explanations. So a lot of times one of the things that takes the longest, I would say, in research is figuring out what are those other possibilities? Can we rule them out? And if so, how might we do that? So a lot of times you may have to go back and do additional, what we call control experiments, if you didn't think about them up front. And so it can often take quite a while to do the analysis component. And then when we're writing a paper, I think one of the major challenges is that writing a paper is it's a very different form of communication than what we typically do in our day-to-day lives. So we have to think a lot about how we explain both why we did what we did, how we did it, what we found, and then why anybody should care.
And I want to add on to that, because you're writing this paper after spending 1, maybe 2 years fully immersed in this project. So it's too hard to separate yourself from the understanding of that project. And you forget that your readers have no idea what you're writing about. They have never seen this. They don't know the nitty gritty. So I would say when you write a paper, our last paper that we wrote, I think I try to count how many times I read it, and I like going over like paragraph at a time, and I think I lost count at like 80 times because that's just how precise everything has to be. And it's also good to kind of give yourself time to forget a little so that you can come to it with like,
because you're too close to it.
Yeah,
exactly.
you're too close. So it's kind of like trying to describe like your child to someone who has never met this person before.
Sure. And it is. It's like your baby.
That doesn't mean
Yeah,
it is.
it's your baby.
You've invested lots of time, energy. Yeah, and I think, and so when we talk about, communication, right? So we're doing one form of communication now, which is for a general audience. But if we were to go and talk to someone in our field about our research, we have to speak in that language. So, I like the term code switching, right? So there's a lot of code switching in science, because especially as engineers in a physical therapy department, we would describe our work in a different way if we're talking to maybe other engineers who don't do a lot of work with human participants, and we'll describe it in a different way if we're talking to physical therapists who primarily work in the clinical domain, but maybe not in research.
Now, I know that you can't talk too much about it, but or at least in depth, but where is some of the research kind of focused now when it comes to stroke recovery and stroke rehabilitation? Where are things at?
So I'll talk a little bit about some of what we do specifically in our lab. So one of the big questions that we have for walking is, once someone has a stroke, what should be the objectives for rehabilitation? In other words, how do we know if someone's walking is better or worse than it was at any given time? And so the primary way that you might assess this performance is by looking at what we might think about as coordination. So how are people walking? You might look at measures of how fast they walk or how far they can do that in a given time. But we're also interested in things related to how much effort does it require, right? And so you can imagine if walking is very effortful, then that might lead someone to be less active. Additionally, we're concerned with falls. So are the changes that we might make to someone's walking pattern going to make them more or maybe even less safe? And so a lot of what we're trying to understand is how do we determine these things? How do we look at how specific changes that we might make in the lab or how a PT might make in the clinic, how does that affect what we might call quantifiable measures of performance? So that's a big area of focus for our group.
I see. And then once some of this data is collected, do companies then come, like maybe companies that create devices or, braces and things like that? I mean, do they get involved at some point? Do they want to implement some of these findings into products? Or
so this depends solely on the type of data or information you're generating. So for what I just described, our hope is that information would go sort of from the lab to a publication to clinical practice, eventually. And maybe that doesn't necessarily need to be monetized. We're also doing some work where we're actually doing technology development. So about a third of our work, or half, is using virtual reality as a technology to create environments in which people can improve their mobility. So think about training environments. So that is an area where, we have a technology, we're developing software, and eventually that might be, commercialized so that it can be provided to different clinics and they can, use what we've created in the lab
to help like stroke survivors get more return on their movement and overall recovery.
Right. Yeah. So we're doing a lot of this work. We talked a little bit offline about different study populations that we engage. So we're doing this a lot right now with people with Parkinson's disease, but this work also applies to people post-stroke. So a big question for thinking about technology development is, what is the value added? So that's another research question, actually. It's, we can measure things, we can create environments and so on, but what's the value added, both not only to the clinician in terms of how this is able to help their practice, but how much does the patient, do they even care, right? Do they benefit? So these are all questions that we're asking with a lot of our ongoing work.
So awesome. Tell me, where do you see things 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now after, all of this great research?
there are many ways we can address this question. Do you want to talk about maybe some of the kind of big data ideas? I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, so one of the projects that we are starting to develop in the lab is this kind of big data approach to our research. So big data is a big buzzword right now because everyone's talking about like all the amount of data that is constantly generated in like via Facebook, what you click online. Well, if you think about what I said previously about the data we collect in the lab, that is also big data in a way. But no one has really looked at the research data as big data. So that's kind of, now we have the technology and kind of the knowledge to apply some of these big data techniques to our movement research. So that might be one of the areas that we're moving into. And hopefully we'll lead in that aspect as well.
Yeah, and I think, to sort of think about applications of data. So one area that you might like to apply that data is to say, for a given person, if we have measurements about that person, what does that tell us about how, therapists may sort of train that particular person? And a lot of sort of data analytic approaches these days are really about this idea of prediction. So can we measure something now and make a prediction about the future?
I see.
So I think that's a big area for particularly those of us in, sort of the engineering analysis and statistics side. But I talked a little bit about what we're doing with virtual reality, but that's just one technology. There's a lot of work on what are called wearables. It's sort of another buzzword, lots of buzzwords. But wearables are basically anything that you sort of carry around with you that's making measurements. So I would say the most common wearable is your phone. Right. So your phone,
how many steps you take.
It takes so step counting. It also tracks where you are. People have Fitbits and activity trackers. So there's a lot of work that's geared toward, again, can be a big data problem. How do you take all this information about a person, how they move, where they move, and use that to either provide value to the person, to help track their performance, or to maybe make suggestions about, you should move more, or you should watch out for these locations. So, we're in kind of the midst of, it's not so much a data revolution, but people are very excited about data. Yeah.
Because I'm sure through tracking some of those movements, you can see exactly how they move. Like, I noticed that, you could see on the computer how I move, whether a leg moves forward or swings out or whatever it does. And then you can take that information and, help somebody's rehabilitation.
And even something just as simple. So one time I had a participant and he came with his wife and we asked him a simple question: have you fallen in the last year? And his answer was no. And his wife was like, you fell yesterday. And you fell like when we were at the beach, and you fell when we were at blah, blah, blah. So even if we could track that, or if a therapist could track that, that has real effects on interventions. So just integrating all this technology that now everyone has some sort of smartphone or wearable device that can give you information. Also, like physical therapists, I know they struggle with actually having their patients do the exercises or the activities that they prescribe.
Getting a little warm in this room.
But some of them are overachievers.
Yeah.
Of course.
That's right, exactly. Show-offs.
But even using that technology to track that the patient is indeed sticking to their program.
Yeah. And I think, a big thing for us, you talked about 5 or 10 years from now. So the work that we are discussing today is almost exclusively done in our lab.
Right.
So you had to come here so that we can record this data about you for our studies. But a big area is that doesn't necessarily tell us what you do when you leave.
Sure.
So this is the kind of the promise of wearable devices, but we need even more innovation beyond what's currently going on, because we'd like to know how are people moving in the real world, and that's not an easy question to answer. So it can be difficult to know the sort of ground truth. You have data from sensors, and you're trying to infer what that person is doing. So that's for those of us who, again, love data, that's an exciting problem to try and tackle, but it's not straightforward.
Wow. You know what? I can say one thing after talking to you guys, and certainly, the times that I've met you, the world of stroke is in good hands. I mean, it really, really, stroke recovery and stroke rehabilitation is in such great hands because of you guys. It seems like I say it every show, but you know what? I deserve to say it every show because you guys deserve to hear it every show. People like you who invest your time and your lives and your careers into helping people like us recover. And it's just amazing. It is just so amazing. And I just thank you so much for what you're doing and how much you put into it. I mean, 2 and 3 and 5 years into one project, and like it's your baby, and you'll read this page in the 80 times. It's just amazing. And
you have dreams about it.
Absolutely, I bet, and maybe even some nightmares too. But yeah, right. But it's just, I just can't thank you guys enough.
It's a two-way road. We couldn't do any of these without participants like you who help us, who volunteer, who just come to our lab and let us place weird sensors on them and don't complain.
Hang out for hours.
And then a piece of equipment fails and we have to smile and pretend like nothing's wrong and keep you entertained.
But it's so worth it, and it's just so cool just to see it all, and just it's awesome. So before we wrap up, any final thoughts?
I think the division's website has some information about current research studies, so if people are interested, I think they can just go to the USC physical therapy website.
I think it's pt.usc.edu. And, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is, there's a lot of ongoing work in the area of stroke rehab in our division. So while our lab primarily focuses on walking, there are other labs who are thinking more about the ability to use the arms and hands beyond stroke. We're also doing work again with Parkinson's disease, looking at developmental disorders. So all the other sort of end of the spectrum. We also have some really exciting work on looking at exercise interventions for people going through chemotherapy. So there's really wide range of work that's happening in the division, and I'd encourage people to just take a look and see if there's
and is this something that others can get involved in terms of volunteering? And
definitely, yeah. So if for a lot of these studies, there are links on our website about ongoing research, and for people who are interested in being involved, they could also look up the relevant faculty and email or call them about other opportunities that are ongoing.
Right now, I mean, we've got listeners that are tuned in right now all over the world. Is this something that goes on in major hospitals all over the world that people can get involved in?
Yeah, so all of this work is international. There are labs all across the globe who are asking similar questions using slightly different approaches, and really the only way that we build knowledge is not just by sort of one group showing a result, but it's is that result can it be replicated among other groups?
Sure.
We can collaborate with other groups to get larger samples and so on.
And how would someone go about trying to volunteer, for studies in their respective city, state, country?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways that you could find more information. Clinicaltrials.gov is a website that lists ongoing clinical trials that are funded through the government. So that's one website. That's national, so that'd be the U.S. Outside of that, you could think about what your local university or medical center. Sometimes it takes a little bit of digging, but you might want to look at physical therapy departments, biomedical engineering, neurology, and they often have very prominent links to ongoing research on their websites.
Wow, you guys. So, definitely look into all of that. It's really, really cool to be a part of studies like this. And it's also very heartwarming to see all the advances that are happening and all the efforts that people are putting into trying to, change stroke, and the outcome of stroke and things like that. I just thank you guys so much for being on the show. My goodness.
Thanks for having us.
So awesome. We've been speaking with Dr. James Finley and Dr. Natalia Sanchez. They are part of the Division for Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy at USC. Definitely look into some of those links and things like that Dr. Finley just discussed. And for everybody listening, we are going to take a break. And by the virtue of radio, when we come back, we're going to be teleported to Burbank, right back to our home base at Providence St. Joseph's Medical Center in Burbank, California. So sit tight and we'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back to Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing, and we are now at our home base location, which is Providence St. Joseph's Medical Center in Burbank, California. We are here with our friends who are fellow stroke survivors, and we're going to kind of go around the table and let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name's Dave. I had a massive right frontal stroke
And how long ago was your stroke, Dave?
in November of 2016.
Yeah, I tell you, your recovery has been absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So now you said you were completely paralyzed on the left
Completely
side?
paralyzed on my left-hand side. They taught me to walk here in about 10 days.
Wow, that's amazing. Really amazing. And next to you is...
I'm Gene, and I had a ischemic stroke in 2011.
When you had your stroke, what was some of the deficits that you had?
I still have it's primarily speech, and I could not write with the right side. So in a way, the right side deficit is actually pretty good because I cannot write a check anymore.
Yeah, that's right. That's what you were saying a few episodes ago. You were saying, yeah, the only problem is I can't write checks anymore. So how you doing on that? You getting better at
How
that
much
now?
money you saved?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right. I maybe am not saving money, but for sure I can't spend money either.
Yeah, right. There you go. You know, Dave, when you had your stroke 2 years ago, I still find it amazing that you had the kind of deficits that you talk about. How quickly did it kind of start to turn around for you?
It didn't happen quickly. I think my arm started moving, but I was told my arm would work first, then my fingers would come last. But once my arm started moving, I don't think I stopped moving it. I just kept on moving it. And now I can actually touch all my digits.
Now you're saying you can carry coffee again?
I can carry coffee, yes, one of my favorite things.
There you go. That's all right. Now, you had also said in the last show that you did Tai Chi and you swam.
Tai Chi and water aerobics.
Okay.
And yoga.
And of the three, the thing that you said was probably the most beneficial was yoga. And
I think yoga and Tai Chi.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Tai Chi is probably the most prevalent.
I see.
I think the choreographed dance of Tai Chi is very methodical, and the form is very important. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of concentration.
Right.
But the people are very good about helping me.
Sure.
My stance and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And there's not only the instructors, but all the other participants are very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And from the time that you had your stroke to when things really kind of settled in and everything kind of came back online, if you will, what kind of time frame are we talking about?
Probably about 6 months before I could actually, say, okay, I want to take this class, I want to take that class, because insurance doesn't last forever. So I looked at Burbank Parks and Recreation, which has a great program. And so I looked to that Parks and Recreation program and started with water aerobics. In the very beginning, the pool was warm, but that was summertime. But now, in the wintertime, it's kind of cold, so I'm going to have to change and go to the Y.
Yeah, right. But, that's an interesting point that you bring up, those, when your insurance runs out, some of these community centers and things like that have some great programs that are going on that, are just a great way to kind of pick back up where insurance and PT and OT and ST kind of left off,
Yeah, the OT, they try. The people are great. I've never met so many wonderful people since I've had my stroke. People really just give it their all, and some of them are really extremely helpful and go way beyond what their job, requires them to do. But they're extremely helpful. Then Burbank Parks and Recs is the same thing. The instructors are great.
Right. Everybody, wherever you're at in the country or in the world, definitely look into some of your community centers and some of, like the local universities maybe and things like that. Any kind of clubs and things like that have things going on, adult education classes and stuff to kind of get involved in, because that can really, again, kind of pick up where some of the OT and PT and the ST stuff kind of leave off, because as you said, insurance doesn't last forever. And
even in my neighborhood, I was like the neighborhood dog. People would walk me at night,
right.
or walk me during the day. If they see me walking, they would come walk. They'd come with me.
Great. That's great.
But when I had the stroke, I had a thing called left neglect. So I was basically blinded in the lower left quadrants of both eyes. So I couldn't. I had to look down to see, and my periphery was shot. I couldn't see across the street.
Isn't that something? Now, I've heard of that before, and now with left neglect, you can kind of see straight through the center of your eye, but not kind of around.
Not your periphery is gone.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it just blacked out, like you just don't see it?
It's like they're blind spots.
Isn't that something?
It's coming back.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, now I can, if I walk on the right side of the street, I can see what's going on the left-hand side of the street without looking.
Good.
But what I would do is, as I walked by cars, I would read license plates to myself. I was very fearful of not being able to drive. Then I found out my left eye is actually 20/20. So, and that's actually a good sign.
Right.
I was vice president of engineering for an aircraft company.
Oh, cool.
Aircraft parts manufacturer. We made parts for Lockheed Martin,
Oh, how cool.
the U.S. government, Singapore, Malaysia, and Israel. So we did all kinds of aircraft structures.
Wow, that's great. And now, do you still work? Or?
No, I do not work. I was pretty much replaced very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there was like 70 people that depended on me going to work and planning that stuff out, and they couldn't just wait for me to come back. So they actually got a couple other people in. I don't know if I'll be going back to work.
Really? Yeah. What do you think you would want to do with your time now? I mean,
well, I may go back and do something else. Right now, I have two young children that I spend time with.
I think they're twins. Did you say they're twins?
I have 8-year-old twins, boy-girl twins.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, one does taekwondo, the other one is into gymnastics. Like yesterday, I took my daughter to gymnastics.
Oh, wow. See,
and today is my turn to pick them up from school.
They'll keep your therapy going, your little PTs at home.
Oh, yeah. They keep me going. They really do. They're great.
That's awesome. And, Gene, what would you say has kind of been the best thing for you in your recovery?
Well, actually, it probably is the various groups I participate in. And because of my deficit, I also go to a couple of speech groups.
Yeah, it's really great what you can learn from some of the support groups and the things that go on. And I really am I really try to encourage everybody to find groups in their area that they can participate in and things like that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back to Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing. And Dave, I remember in last week's show you had mentioned that one of the things that you had after the stroke was post-stroke pain, like headaches and things like that. How long did they last? Do you still have
it?
Yeah.
If I can't move my left arm without there being pain. But it's kind of, I know it's in my head. I know it's not my arm.
Right.
So I just keep moving it.
Right.
But like grabbing things, and it hurts, but but I know what it is. I know it's my head, not my arm.
Right. See, and I think that's what's really been great about your recovery is that you have stayed so active. Like you wouldn't let grass grow under anything, boy. You just kept, like you said, even at the hospital, when you were in the hospital, you were walking the halls at night and, things like that.
Yeah, like I wouldn't recommend it because if you fall, you're going to extend your stay.
Sure.
I thought I was being pretty smart that I could get my socks on and get my shoes on by myself. I mean, they teach you how to put your socks on with one hand.
Right.
And I was, very grateful that they did. And I'd put my socks on, my shoes, and I'd walk in the hallways. And at first it was just to go to the bathroom, and I think they kept on thinking I was going to the bathroom. Well, then I got to where I'd get down the hallway, and I'd go a little bit farther, and I'd go a little bit farther.
To the stairway? Oh, no.
And then, But I got caught a lot more than once, but then I had the lectures. The more I gained, the better I felt about myself. And, you just keep going. It's like going up and down stairs. Behind the hospital, there's a stairway out in the field. And so I'd go up and down those stairs. A nurse would come and get me, and then we'd go up and down the stairs. Up and down the stairs. I mean, I grabbed the rail up, grabbed the rail down, up and down, up and down. So I think they were very, very supportive. If not, prodded you to go get better.
Sure.
And then walking around in the parking lots and walking around uneven ground, all that stuff helps.
Now, was your thing primarily balance then for the most part?
No, I couldn't move my left side at all. And finally it started coming online, little by little, and then just was one step after the other. And I remember in rehab or even in the gym, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was had me lay on the floor just to see if I could get up. And he basically said, if you fall, now you know how to get up.
Right.
So it's just all that learning.
Sure.
You know, you have all that learning your whole life, and then basically it's gone.
Right.
Just like that.
Isn't that the truth?
Kind of like that.
Right.
Pretty good,
You're
huh?
snapping. That's good. See? There you go.
Almost, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's just all that stuff that you've learned, and it's just all of a sudden it's gone.
Right.
Then you just have to learn it again, and you know you can do it.
Sure. And then when you got home, you drilled yourself even more. You were saying you had a rolling pin or something like that?
I had a rolling pin, yeah. My left hand wouldn't work, so what I did, my wife had this old rolling pin. It was a solid dowel. And I would put it in one hand, and I would try to twist it with the other, trying to build back strength. And I just twisted it and twisted it and twisted it. And then she got me those balls, those different, it's like an elastic ball, but some of them are different hardnesses.
Sure, different densities,
and you'd squeeze those, and I'd do that. Then just, trying to pick up a coin.
Right.
Without going to the edge of the table, just trying to pick up a coin,
Right.
Do that with all your fingers.
I've heard some people say that they've even gone to like the dollar store and just gotten like little cheap kids' toys to play with. Just little things like that. Just some of the most simple things.
Well, I have 2 kids, so the toys were in abundance.
Exactly.
But then I did.
Mom, Dad's playing with my toys again.
Yeah. And then there's a thing where they got me a bucket, and they put pinot beans in the bucket.
Yes.
Dried pinot beans, and stuffed my hand down inside, and I'd try to grab as many as I could and lift them up and drop them, and lift them up and drop it. I did that while I was watching TV.
There you go.
I would play with the beans.
And they say that that's kind of the biggest thing too, is just the constant repetition, just over and over.
You have to keep doing it over and over again. It's not 10 times or 100 times, it's 1,000 times.
Sure.
You just got to keep doing it and get that stuff going.
Absolutely. Is there anything that either of you used to do that you haven't been able to do yet again?
I currently can't swim, but I'm getting there. And that was the reason for water aerobics. I mean, I would get in at one side of the pool, and I would duck down and get underneath the water. And the instructor was very good about it. She would just say, if you start fledgling, I'm going to come in after you. I said, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But she, and then she allowed me to use a paddle board and kick, and go across the pool, that stuff, which basically that's not what the class was about. But then she gave me a card to a swimming instructor so I could start to learn how to swim again. And I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, what is it about swimming that you say that you're not able to do yet?
I was kayaking before.
Yeah, you showed me some video. That's awesome. Really.
I was whitewater kayaker.
So what is it about swimming that you're not able to do again yet?
The coordination of my arms.
I see.
Doing like the breaststroke and stuff like that. I mean, I can probably swim, but it'd be like like a frog stroke or something like that, or a breaststroke. But I just haven't gotten to that point yet.
I don't know, man. You are just so
I think
I'll
get there. It's just gonna
you're absolutely going to get there.
Oh, yeah.
I would put money on it.
I'd love to get back on a surfboard too.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
And Gene, what about you? What have you?
The basic problem is pretty basic. It's about using chopsticks.
I knew you were going to say that. I was like, I know he's going to say that. Gene has this running thing where he wants to be able to learn how to use chopsticks again.
Especially across the table. So in the family style food.
Right.
Because I think that you tend to not be very nourished if you're the only one with a deficit. Because you cannot reach across
I've been
the
blessed.
table.
I can use chopsticks.
Yeah, right. That's
See,
something.
my deficit is on the right side.
Oh, yeah.
So I try to use the chopsticks with the left side, and probably can get by. But I think that it would be better if I could learn on the right. Of course, there goes the excuse for writing checks.
Yeah, there you go.
No, with pot stickers, I just stab them.
There you go. Absolutely. When you're out, shopping and things like that, is there ever a time where you're kind of nervous about being out because maybe of your balance or things like that? Is there any difficulties being out and about still?
Well, I think at first I was getting tired, and then my daughter had her first father-daughter dance, and I wasn't going to pass that up. So I started walking. I'd walk 3 to 5 miles a day, building up endurance. until I finally made it. Then I went to that dance with her, and we danced for 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
Now, I probably look like the worst dancer in the world, but I was there, and I did it.
Amen.
And that was the most important thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So really, it sounds like what you're saying in terms of your recovery and the advice that, really is kind of coming home to me, and I'm sure many of our listeners, is just constantly working at it, not giving up.
Don't give up. Just keep going.
Yeah.
Even if you just get up just to go check the mail.
Right.
And come back in. Just get out there and do it.
I think that neuroplasticity is about repetition.
Yes.
And I think that what he is doing is very, very important.
Right.
So I'm very glad also.
Yeah. Now, what do you say to the person who's like, okay, look, I'm like a year into this thing, that affected side, I'm tired of fooling with it. I've got my unaffected side doing double time, and I got the routine down pretty well, so I'm just going to I give up.
Wrong. Suck it up. Just get going.
Yeah.
Just do it. Get to a gym, or get to a support group. Get to Parks and Recs. Get something to where you get the other side going. You just got to do it. You can't just sit there. You got to get moving.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to just sit there too, though.
It is.
It's like you want to get something done. You want to get it done in a hurry. You don't want to fool around and spend 20 minutes doing something that used to take you 2 seconds.
Yep.
But now this thing called stroke comes in, and now it's going to take you forever. And it's just as easy to just kind of put the other one to work and just make it do.
Yeah, but you have that chance to read all those books that you didn't read before.
Yes, right.
Get to it. Just
Sure.
do it.
And that brings up another thing I wanted to talk about too, is with the time that you have on hand now, like you'll hear, some stroke survivors go through depression and things like that. I really think that this is a time for people to kind of do the things that you kind of put off and never were really doing before. You just tend to look at things obviously a little differently,
Yeah, if you need, the mental health issue thing is very important. You've got to get to either a therapist or a psychologist and just work it out until you have that drive back and just, then go get it. I see a psychologist.
I think that there's some stroke survivors is like, it's too hard to get out. It's just easy to sit home, sit on the couch, sit in a wheelchair.
You can do that too. I get out, but I do Uber.
Right.
I just don't like being dependent on people. I can't drive. I know I can't drive safely, and until I take a class to where I can actually drive safely, I'm not going to, and I don't plan on it.
Right. Well, that's very responsible. Absolutely.
I think that he's very logical. He is concerned about the safety of others.
Yes.
When driving.
That's right.
But I don't care. I'm terrible.
You're terrible already? No. Well, we have your wife that keeps an eye on you, though. So
no kidding.
Oh gosh, we just love her to pieces. She's such a beautiful lady. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we've got more right after this. Hey, this is Christopher Ewing with a Life After Stroke health tip. So if you're a stroke survivor with any kind of paralysis, then you know how frustrating it can be to try to do some normal everyday tasks. Things that used to be so quick and easy now seem almost impossible to do using, let's say, our hand or our arm on our affected side. Now, I say almost impossible because in many cases, our affected arm and hand are still able to do things. We just have to give them the opportunity to do it. And we have to resist the urge to baby them, as an OT told me once, or consider them no longer able to do things all because of the stroke. Now, when I was in the hospital, I remember one of the doctors telling me, "You didn't break a bone, your arm is still there, and is just as intact as it was before your stroke. You just have to help wake those muscles back up and re-educate your brain on how to make it work, and constantly remind your arm that it is still a part of your body and that it still has a job to do." Now, that whole way of thinking really hit me one day a couple of months ago. I was at home about to go from one room to another, and as I was leaving the room, the thought crossed my mind to reach, using my left arm, my affected side, to turn the light off. And then I immediately said to myself, oh wait, I can't use that arm because it doesn't work, so I have to use my right arm to do this. And so I reached with my right arm and turned the light off. But then I immediately thought, wait a minute, how do I know if I could do that with my left arm or not? I didn't even try. So I turned the light back on using my right arm and hand, and then reached up with my left arm and hand, and taking all of 10 extra seconds at the most to do it, I turned the light off. And then I started to think, I wonder how many times could my left arm and left hand have actually done what I wanted it to do if I had just tried. So that's when I decided to implement a new rule, kind of a game, if you will, that I want you to try to do also. I call it 3 tries. Basically, the rule is that you try to do something using your affected arm or hand, and you give it 3 tries. And if you are still unable to do whatever it is after 3 tries, then you can use your non-affected arm and hand, but only after you've tried at least 3 times, no matter how long it takes. Now, of course, if you're in a hurry, then you got to do what you got to do. But seriously, whenever time allows, really make a concerted effort to use your affected arm and hand instead of just automatically using your non-affected side just because it's easier or faster. I especially implement this rule if what I want to reach for is on the affected side of my body. Basically, whatever is on my left side is my left arm and hand's responsibility, and whatever is on my right side is my right arm and hand's responsibility. I make every effort to not reach across my body to do something using my right hand if that something is on my left side. Now, if you try this little game, trust me, you will be surprised at just how much your hand and your arm can actually do if you just give it a chance to show you. Now, if you have a really cool health tip that you'd like to share with others, tell us about it. Just go to our website, www.thestrokechannel.tv. That's thestrokechannel.tv. I'm Christopher Ewing, and this has been a Life After Stroke health tip. Hey everybody, this is Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing, and let's comment a bit about how to maintain just the energy to kind of keep working out and keep trying, without becoming complacent and kind of lazy about it, as Gene puts it. It's real easy to just kind of say, you know what, it's just much easier to just knock this out with what we call the good hand and, let the bad one just kind of hang there and don't do anything. I mean, it's very, very easy to just kind of fall into that kind of lazy gap.
I think that after considerable analysis, I find that the efficacy for patients is lacking in the various associations and even the hospital. So one of my primary goals is to somehow get the patients to be heard, because I think that the success of therapy has a lot to do with the patient. I mean, it certainly has to do with research and the skills of the practitioner, but if you don't include the patient in the equation, I think you miss a huge link.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And, and to stay motivated in the midst of those relationships that, when you work with people, we as stroke survivors have to be really, really determined to do the work. Like you were saying, Dave, you can't give up. You have to work at it.
Yeah, you have to work at it. I know when I went to take Tai Chi, I talked to the instructor, and I said, basically, I've had a stroke, and it's a massive right frontal, and my left side is just starting to work again, but I don't give up. Mm-hmm. And she said, okay, then come to the classes.
Sure.
So I started the classes, and that was probably 3 months ago.
Right. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back to Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing, and let's kind of take this home now. Let's give some advice to some of the listeners that are listening who are stroke survivors. And Dave, we're going to start with you. Just give us a good kick in the butt, because man, you have just done so well in your recovery.
Well, I would, if you're not getting enough through the rehabilitation, through your insurance, I would move out to your parks and recreations. They have many programs. I know Burbank does, and they have some great programs with like Tai Chi, yoga, water aerobics, and those have really helped me.
Right. Mr. Gene, what about you?
I guess the most important thing is never give up. I think that now that I've learned more about it, that strokes and aging are part of the process. So I think that perhaps the ignorance has to be forgotten, and your persistence has to rise above all of it.
Very true. Very true. So for everybody listening, I want to kind of go here with this. We're going to have a little bit of homework. One of the things that I think is very important is that we set goals for ourselves, and we even should monitor and track our little milestones as we go along the way. Like, we all know that fateful day when we actually had the stroke, but I think we should also kind of keep track and monitor when things start to come back online, if you will. I've made a note for when I took my first steps again. I made a note, I think it was back in June, when I was able to actually close my fingers. It took 2 months. It was from April to June until I could actually, really close my fingers and open them again on command, type of thing. So I think it's important that we should definitely make note of some of the milestones that we have. And so start your milestone journal, if you will, and try some of these things out. You've heard me talk about where I have like a rule where it's like the 3 tries rule or the take 3 rule, where you'll try something with your affected side at least 3 times before you give up in any kind of way and just use your unaffected side to do it. So, that's our homework for the rest of the week. We're going to really make a concerted effort of trying things with our affected side that we might normally not do as much, or we might not try as hard. Push yourself and see the type of return that you're able to get, see the type of results that you're able to get, and make note of that. Make a little chart from it, do whatever you need to do, and see how much more you're actually going to get back just through focusing very, very hard on achieving those kind of goals, and see if you don't see some results from it. I'm sure you probably will. So that's it for this week, and I thank you very much for listening, everybody. And as I say, until next time, remember, there is still a beautiful life after stroke.
This has been a recorded program of an actual stroke support group. The comments expressed are the opinions of the participants, and not necessarily the opinions of the producers, sponsors, or the broadcasters of this show. This program is not to be used as a way to diagnose or treat any medical condition that you may have. Please consult your doctor or healthcare professional before making any changes to your current medical routine.